episode of the Range Minded Podcast. We go back in time. We're not going to spend too much time talking about the pistol brace rule. It's been ad nauseum everywhere you find, right? We're going to go back in time all the way back to 1934. That's right. We're going to talk about the NFA, how we got it, and maybe how we can get rid of it. Nah, won't worry about that quite yet. But this is a brief conversation on the NFA. Hope you enjoy. All right, let's get it on. Hey, what's happening? It's Steve with the Range Minded Podcast. Welcome back. So we're going to be doing the video version. I'm going to start using Rumble a little bit more, just watching some of the stuff that's happening on YouTube. A bunch of creators are finding their content either suddenly demonetized or vanished altogether. So YouTube's getting kind of rough when it comes to the firearms community. So I'm going to try and use Rumble a little bit more. So we're going to start pushing a lot of our video content that way. Of course, you can find us on our social media accounts while we can. All right, there is tons of stuff happening. Maybe you've heard some stuff about the pistol brace final rule, right? But that's not what we're going to talk about. There's tons of other content available. Honestly, look at the Four Boxes Diner, look at the Armed Attorneys, look at the Armed Scholar, and many, many other YouTube channels that are already out there. They're just talking about this way better, more. See? Let's try that again. They're talking about it more and better than I can share any content, because a lot of those folks, especially like Armed Attorneys and the Four Boxes Diner, Mark Smith is, by the way, that's his name. I couldn't remember his name last episode. Their content is on point because they're actually attorneys and they know how to read the legalese. And there's a ton of confusion. There's just a ton of stuff going around. Rumor has it this sometime in the next few days that'll actually be published, which will put the 120 days into effect. Again, talk to your attorney. Figure out what's best for you. I cannot tell you what to do. If you're taking anything I say as legal advice, you're a fool. I am not an attorney. I don't claim to be an attorney. This is not legal advice. That being said, you do what you need to do, but I strongly encourage you to communicate with an attorney that understands the Second Amendment. Anyway, let's get to what we really want to talk about today. This is kind of the second part of a multiple-part series, which could end up being going through some of the old lawsuits through the Supreme Court, kind of like how we got where we are with some of these gun laws, and hopefully what I'm going to share with you tonight or day or whatever time it is you're listening to this. It's nighttime for me recording. The best time for me to record these shows is like 10, 11 o'clock at night, so I end up getting a little punch drunk and sometimes a little wound up. But see, and I have such a hard time staying focused, right? I know you guys been with me a long time. You know that I like to veer off a little bit here and there. I apologize. That's just how this worthless mind works. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the NFA and how we got it and what it says. I know a lot of you guys could probably just as easily dig into the content that I have found, but hopefully when we have this little conversation about it, it'll give you an idea, and then you can go back and research it and learn a little bit more about it yourself. So let's first jump to what the NFA actually says. There's going to be a lot of reading. I apologize, I am not a strong reader. Hopefully I can slow down, because I tend to talk really fast, and my mind reads faster than my mouth can spit out the words, and it gets kind of jumbled up. So I'm going to slow down, and we're going to talk, and we're going to read through this, and I'll share my thoughts about some of this stuff. Okay, so this is off the ATF's website on the NFA itself. So the NFA was originally enacted in 1934. Similar to the current NFA, the original act imposed a tax on the making and transferring of firearms defined by the act, as well as a special occupational tax on the persons, entities engaged in the business of importing, manufacturing, and dealing with NFA firearms. The law also required the registration of all NFA firearms with the Secretary of the Treasury, which I kind of find that weird to think now that we're registering it not with the not with the ATF, but with the Treasury. It's interesting. Firearms subject to the 1934 Act include shotguns and rifles having barrels less than 18 inches in length. Contain certain firearms described as any other weapons, machine guns, and firearms with mufflers or silencers. Okay, so that first portion was actually taken from the original National Firearms Act from 1934. If you paid attention to what I just said, it says any rifles or shotguns with barrels shorter than 18 inches. But if you're savvy and you know what's going on, you're going to say, I thought it was rifles shorter than 16 inches. And you're right. It got changed. And a little caveat of why it got changed. So I guess after a certain time period, right, the United States had brought a bunch of M1 carbines back, and they were selling them to other places. And all those had barrels less than 18 inches. So because the government can do what they want, they're like, oops, let's hurry and fix the NFA, and we'll say any rifle shorter than 16 inches. So they were in compliance. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to write your own rules? So when you don't comply, you can just rewrite them. But I digress. While the NFA was enacted by Congress as an exercise of its authority to tax, the NFA had an underlying purpose unrelated to revenue collection. And we're going to get into that a little bit later too. As the legislative history of the law discloses, its underlying purpose was to curtail, if not prohibit, transactions in NFA firearms. Congress found these firearms to possess a significant crime problem because of their frequent use in crime. Does that sound familiar? Okay. Particularly in gangland crimes of that era, such as the St. Valentine's Massacre, which if you guys look that up, that's crazy. The $200 making the transfer tax on most NFA firearms was considered to be quite severe and adequate to carry out by Congress's purpose to discourage or eliminate the transaction of these firearms. The $200 tax stamp has not been changed since 1934. Okay, we're going to stop right there, and I'm going to talk about, I did a little bit of math. Now, I'm not a math genius, but I did what I could. Let's just look and see. I decided, well, what was the mean hourly wage in 1934? And the sources I could find was about 46 cents an hour. That's, wow, 46 cents. Okay, and then I figured there's probably 2,080 hours in a work week, which brought it up to an annual income of $959, give or take a few pennies. Okay, now, if you think of that $200 tax stamp in 1934 and your annual income was $959, that's over 20% of your income would have been towards that $200 tax stamp. Now, mobsters, you also got to think like the Prohibition era. I mean, this is all around the same time. And those dudes that had dirty money, $200 was nothing. I mean, they were making hundreds of thousands of dollars, in a few months. So $200 was nothing to them. But they could also get them for tax evasion if they had any of these firearms. Hence the term for the Treasury, right? Because they weren't paying their taxes on these special firearms, unusual and dangerous. They were able to get them on some tax evasion charges as well. So 20% of your income in 1934 would have been dedicated to this $200 tax stamp. Now, I decided, okay, well, what's a good hourly average wage now? So I looked it up. In 2022, average hourly wage was $26.02 per hour. Again, if we figured 2,080 hours in a year, that brings your salary to $54,132 annually. So since that tax hasn't changed, that is now 1/3 of 1% of that annual income. Okay. If we times that by 20%, just over 20% of your income now, it would be roughly $11,000, $11,289. That was my poor math skills. So it's a pretty severe tax if you look at it back then. Now it would suck, and I'm glad they haven't changed it, because $11,000 for a tax stamp is more than, well, now it's a lot of money. That's a lot of money, right? All right, back to the ATF's website. Where was I? As structured in 1934, the NFA imposed a duty on persons transferring NFA firearms, as well as the mere possessors of unregistered firearms, to register them with the Secretary of Treasury. If the possessor of an unregistered firearm applied to register the firearm as required by the NFA, the Treasury Department could supply information to the state authorities about the registrant's possession of the firearm. State authorities could then use the information to prosecute the person whose possession violated state laws. Do we need to read that again? Because that could come into play. Yeah, let's read it again. The Treasury Department could supply information to the state authorities about the registrant's possession of a firearm. The state authorities could then use the information to prosecute the person whose possession violated state laws. For these reasons, the Supreme Court in 1968 held in the Haynes case that a person prosecuted for possessing an unregistered NFA firearm had a valid defense to the prosecution. The registration requirement imposed on the the possessor of an unregistered firearm violated the possessor's privilege from self-incrimination under the Fifth Amendment. The Haynes decision made the 1934 Act virtually unenforceable. So there was a case in Haynes. In fact, I think I actually, nope, that's Miller that we're going to talk about in a minute. So there is a case where this guy Haynes had a gun, and they were going to prosecute him. He applied for the information, and then they tried to prosecute him for the information that he gave him. But they said, hey, that's like, you can't do that. You can't prosecute. And then a lot of people are referring to the Haynes thing right now as if you supply your information on your arm brace, and then the ATF can say, hey, after 88 days, we're going to prosecute you if you get denied. So in the Haynes Act, it said, hey, you can't do that. Now I'm going to have to do a little bit more research on the Haynes Act. But honestly, Four Boxes Diner, again, he deep dives into that. So you don't have to listen to my sexy voice. All right, Title II of the GCA. This took place in 1968. They amended it a little bit. Title II amended the NFA to cure the constitutional flaw pointed out in the Haynes case. First, the requirement for possessors of unregistered firearms to register was removed. Indeed, under the amended law, there is no mechanism for the possessor to register an unregistered NFA firearm already possessed by the person. Second, the provision was added to the law prohibiting the use of any information from an NFA application or registration as evidence against the person in criminal proceedings with respect to the violation of a law occurring prior to the concurrency with the filing of the application of registration. In 1971, the Supreme Court re-examined the NFA in the Freed case and found that the 1968 amendments cured the constitutional defect of the original NFA. Title II also amended the NFA's definitions of firearm by adding destructive devices and explaining the definition of a machine gun, which I'm not going to get into that. If you're a gun guy or gal, you know how frustrating the definition of their machine gun is. All right. The Firearms Protection Act in 1986, they call it the Firearms Protection Act. There wasn't a lot of protecting of firearms owners in this particular case. In 1986, the act amended the NFA's definition of silencer by adding a combination of parts for silencers and any part intended for the use in assembly or fabrication of a silencer. The act also amended the GCA, Gun Control Act, to prohibit the transfer or possession of machine guns. Exceptions were made for transfers of machine guns to or possession of machine guns by government agencies and those lawfully possessed before the effective date of the prohibition on May 19, 1986. All right, so what does all this stuff mean? Okay, so that was straight from the ATF's website. So what we learned, they gave us a little overview of the Gun Control Act, or the NFA and the GCA as well. So let's jump to a case that took place in 1939. It was USV Miller. So I'm going to do a little bit more reading. I apologize. Hopefully you can understand what I'm saying. I promise we'll get to a little commentary later on. But this is important that we understand this. We need to see where we've been in order to know where we're going. I feel, as we read through this, and maybe you'll get the same ideas or same thought process, I feel that the Bruin case could dismantle the NFA. It could put it in jeopardy. This is why Bruin is so important. And some of these other cases that we've won along the way, they're key. They're, like Mark Smith says, Four Boxes Diner, they're these bricks in this wall that's fortifying the Second Amendment. Bruin is huge. Huge. All right, so let's jump back here. Okay, Miller. So Mr. Miller, Jack Miller, and Frank Layton, they had a little bit of trouble with the law. They got caught trying to transport a double-barreled shotgun that was shorter than 18 inches on the barrel length, and they got pinched by the coppers. I think that's how they said it back then. Sorry if I offended any pennies. All right, so Justice McReynolds delivered this. Oh, do you know what else you need to understand? And maybe this helps you dislike the NFA even a little bit more. So, who was president in 1934? Anyone? Bueller? Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was not a good president. And if you think he was, you learned the wrong side of history. The New Deal screwed up America, kept us in the Depression even longer. He was not a good president. He was a super lefty. Like, he hated guns. He was scared of guns. He did shoot, but he didn't like guns. He did hunt, but he was no fan of the Second Amendment. And kind of, wow, it's almost like history rhymes, right? Curious. All right. An indictment of District Court, Western District of Arkansas, charged that Jack Miller and Frank Layton did unlawfully, knowingly, willfully, and feloniously transport in interstate commerce from the town of Claremore in the state of Oklahoma, to the town of Siloam Springs? Yeah, we'll just say Siloam Springs in Arkansas, a certain firearm, to wit, a double-barreled 12-gauge Stevens shotgun having a barrel less than 18 inches in length, bearing the ID numbers. It'd be cool if you could find this shotgun somewhere in some archive. If you're in some seized port of the seized area of wherever the federal government takes seized guns, and you find a little 12-gauge shotgun with the serial number 76230, man, it's a piece of history. All right. At the time, so transporting said firearm in interstate commerce, that's another key you need to understand, interstate commerce, and we can talk about that at a later date. As foresaid, not having registered said firearm as required by the NFA. Okay? I'm going to scroll down because there's so much boring stuff. So, Justice McReynolds goes through, and maybe we should read some of this just so you guys understand. So, what this case held, well, we'll get to that because I'll read that part of the decision making later. It's a little bit later down. But what's his name? McReynolds, McMuffin, Bueller. So he goes through and says, hey, when we go through the Constitution and it says a well-regulated militia necessary to the security of a free state, he says, hey, Mr. McFluffer. Oh, I guess I shouldn't say that. Anyway, he said the militia, no, you can't use the militia argument. Militias were done and controlled by each state. Each state had different militia requirements. Short-barreled shotguns, not machine guns in this time, and short-barreled rifles, a 18-inch rifle at that time. They had no use in military service, zero. And the militia was controlled by the state, not by anybody else. So you cannot use the argument the militia was the purpose, or that any of these firearms fit in the definition of use of a militia. And he goes through a bunch of different states that have their laws written. I'm not going to get into it, but it is actually kind of interesting. They even have sites where they got this information from each state. It's actually pretty interesting. But his argument again was, no, you can't use the militia argument because they didn't have these guns. They used muskets, and a short-barreled shotgun has no place in the military, no place in the battlefield. It's kind of annoying. So let's jump down to the next justice Mr. Justice Douglas. And his information, this part of the act, this part of the law that we're reading from, really digs into the meat and potatoes of what this ended up doing. Okay, the NFA. All right, 1934, the Act of June 26, 1934. That for the purpose of this act, the terms of firearms. Okay, let's try that again. The term firearm means a shotgun or rifle having a barrel no less than 18 inches in length, or any other weapon except pistol or revolver. Pistol, listen, or revolver from which a shot is discharged by an explosive, if such weapon is capable of being concealed on the person, or a machine gun, and includes a muffler or silencer for any weapon, whether or not such firearm is included within the foregoing definition. So, shotguns, short-barreled shotguns, short-barreled rifles, machine guns, and suppressors. All of these must have been such a huge deal in 1934. Okay. Let's see. Foregoing position. But does not include any rifle is within the foregoing provisions solely by reason of length of its barrel if the caliber of such rifle is .22 or smaller, and if its barrel is 16 inches or more in length. So anything that's 22 caliber, you notice it doesn't say rimfire. Anything that's 22 or smaller. So, honestly, my 5.56 should be just fine in an SBR. Bless their hearts. Section 3. There shall be levied, collected, and paid upon firearms transferred in the continental United States a tax at the rate of $200 for each firearm, such tax to be paid by the transferor and to be represented by an appropriate stamp to be provided by the commissioner with all approval of the secretary, and the stamps herein provided shall be affixed to the order for such firearm hereinafter provided for. The tax imposed by this section shall be in addition to any import duty imposed on such firearm. It shall be unlawful for any person to transfer a firearm except in the pursuance of written order from the person seeking to obtain such article on an application from issued in blank in duplicate for that purpose by the commissioner. I wonder why it says in blank. That's really what it says. Such order shall identify the applicant by such means as identification as may be prescribed by the regulations under this act, provided that if the applicant is an individual, such identification shall include fingerprints and a photograph thereof. Each person so transferring the firearm shall set forth in each copy of such order of manufacturer's number or other mark identifying such firearms, and shall forward a copy of such order to the commissioner. The original thereof, with stamps affixed, shall be returned to the applicant. No person shall transfer a firearm which has previously been transferred on or after the effective date of this act, unless such person, in addition to complying with subsection C, transfers therewith the stamp affixed order provided in this section for each such prior transfer, in compliance with such regulations as may be prescribed under this act for proof of payment of all taxes on such firearm. Within 60 days after effective date of this act, every person possessing a firearm shall register with the collector of the district which he resides the number of or the mark identifying such firearm, together with his name, address, place where such firearm is usually kept, and place of business or employment, and if such person is other than a natural person, the name and home address of an executive officer thereof, provided that no person shall be required to register under this section with respect to any firearm acquired after the effective date of and in conformity with the provisions of this act. It shall be unlawful for any person to receive or possess any firearm which has at any time been transferred in violation of sections 3 and 4 of this act. Okay, they have to be taxed, and you can't transfer it if you don't. It shall be unlawful for any person who is required to register as provided in section 5 hereof, and who shall not have so registered, or any other person who has not in his possession a stamp affixed order as provided in section 4 hereof, to ship, carry, or deliver any firearm in interstate commerce. We hear interstate commerce again. That still applies today. The Commissioner, with the approval of the Secretary, shall prescribe such rules and regulations as may be necessary for carrying the provisions of this act into effect. Any person who violates or fails to comply with any requirements of this act shall, upon conviction, be fined not more than $2,000 or be imprisoned for not more than 5 years, or both, in the discretion of the court. Okay, so $2,000. Remember, this is 1934. Your annual income was $900. So that was over 2 years of your income. That's a lot of money, especially for poor people back then. If any provision of this act or application thereof to any person or circumstance is held invalid, the remainder of this act and the application of such provision to other persons or circumstances shall not be affected thereby. This act may be cited as the National Firearms Act. Okay, so there we read the whole thing. The whole thing. Actually, not the whole thing, because we didn't talk about militia stuff. All right, why on God's green earth do I need to read this to you guys? Whoops, my computer just shut off. Oh, come on, little fella. All right. So that was Miller, okay? Miller was a big deal. Why did I put Staples in there? No, not Staples, but Staples versus U.S. That's going to be a different topic. All right, so when it comes to the NFA, it's changed a little bit, right? We just read off the ATF's website that it changed in the 60s and it changed again in 1986. And a lot of the stuff hasn't changed much other than the short-barreled rifle stuff, right? It was 18 inches. Unless it was 22 caliber, then it was 16 inches. Then they looked at it and said, oh, again, it was a whoops by the United States government when they were getting rid of M1 carbines, which I would love to have. But because that was 16 inches, they violated their own law and they had to amend it so they wouldn't, be in trouble by and to themselves. The nice thing is that we know where we've been, okay? We know how we got the NFA. It had to do with crime, right? That's what it talked about in the ATF's website. The NFA had to do with crime and the unusual amount of crime that was taking place. Think of the Tommy guns. Like, think of The Godfather, right? And during the Prohibition, there was a lot of violence, a lot of gang violence, like in Chicago. Like, again, look up that Valentine's Day massacre. It is a mess. There was a lot of violence, but it was perpetrated by violent men. Well, and women, if you count. Anyway, I digress. Focus. Violent people, okay? They weren't assault weapons. They didn't understand the term assault weapon. It had nothing to do with that. They definitely didn't have AR-15s. They were full autos, right? Sure, that's crazy. They had suppressors, not silencers. They had suppressors. Yes, I know the original patent that said silencer on it. They had mufflers on their guns. How's that make you feel? And they were breaking the law. It was already illegal to murder somebody, so that was breaking the law, right? You couldn't be violent against other people. That was breaking a law. And And according to Justice McMaster, it wasn't covered under the Constitution. They had full autos in military use. They used the Tommy gun. Okay? Yeah, it was a full auto. Look at the Maxim. Okay? They had all this stuff back then. 1911, they had semi-automatic handguns, right? Thanks, John Moses Browning. They had all this stuff. Technology had already advanced. Honestly, since Browning, there hasn't been a lot of change to how firearms run. It hasn't been. There's some little adaptations, but blowback, recoil operate, all this stuff, hasn't changed. Very little. What's changed? The hearts of men and an overreaching government. I know that's probably not popular for some people to hear. They don't want to hear me talk about that. It's overreaching. They've grown out their britches. Do I think the NFA should be abolished? That's a good question. Yes. Yes, I do. Well, what about F-15? You need F-15s to take over the country. No, you don't. And I'm not trying to take over a country. I'm not suggesting that we take over the country. This is not an insurrection podcast. No, this is not. This is about being good stewards of the Second Amendment. First of all, if a president's willing to use military force against his people, and he said it straight up, you can't stand against the military. You'd have to have tanks and F-15s and nuclear bombs. They consistently say that. The left consistently says that. President Biden says it all the time whenever he brings up the Second Amendment. You don't need F-15s. Here's the problem. What good are F-15s if your pilots won't do it? You have millions of dollars sitting on a runway with nobody to fly. How did our war in Afghanistan go? 20 years? Is that what it was? 20 years fighting against people that lived in caves. If their argument was just or justified, that war would have been over in a week, 2 weeks. But now, they do have F-15s and helicopters and military-grade equipment and, real assault rifles and rocket launchers and all this stuff. Because the guy that says we can't have guns to protect ourselves and defend our liberty gave hundreds of millions of dollars to people that don't care. Yes, he was willing to abandon American government property, federal property, paid for by you and me. He just left it there, along with a lot of people. But you and I can't have guns. Come on, folks. Come on. The Second Amendment has nothing to do with hunting. The Second Amendment has nothing to do with sport shooting. A well-regulated militia. Okay? According to him, in 1934, the court, and honestly now, right, there's a lot of constitutional scholars that say it was only meant for the state militia. Has nothing to do with a person. The people, and he even talks about it, look it up. The federal government didn't provide the arms to the militia. It was required for each able-bodied man to have a musket, a sword, and munitions and powder. At the time of its writing, there was no standing military. It was all about volunteer. Because they were patriots. Because they cared about their country. Because they cared about their freedom, the right to property, the right to life. The Second Amendment is about defending your rights, your privileges, and your property, and your lives. Why do I get so frustrated with like stuff with arm braces, right? It seems so benign. It is just a piece of plastic and Velcro or a piece of rubber, right? It seems so silly. Why should we make such a big deal out of an arm brace rule? Because it's none of their damn business, is why. Honestly, if you look at the NFA, if you look at short-barreled rifles, it's okay for us to have a handgun. It's okay for us to have a rifle, right? Handguns could be, I've seen handguns with 14, 15-inch barrels. And then if you get to an AR pistol, yeah, it can be up to 14 inches, whatever. And then we got rifles on this side, which are 16 and beyond. So we can have little short guns, and we can have long guns. But the ones right in the middle, no, we can't have. No, those are so dangerous. Oh my gosh. If, adding something to a handgun makes it more concealable, that is their relevancy. Like that's their thought process. They cited, now this should sound familiar because we did talk about the final rule. And they said adding an arm brace makes an AR pistol more concealable and more accurate. And yeah, they did say it turns it into a bump stock, which is complete garbage. It's stupid. You got to be an idiot to think this. It doesn't make the gun any more powerful. It doesn't make the gun any more accurate. It doesn't make the gun any more deadly. It doesn't add explosive rounds to it. But for some reason, we can't have SBRs and SBSs, shotguns, right? It is an outdated rule. They say that the Second Amendment is outdated. No, the Second Amendment is contemporary always. It is always relevant. The NFA is out of date. Way out of date. It needs to be revisited. It needs to be overthrown, overruled, overturned, set on fire, buried in the backyard. It is an irrelevant law. No, it's not about revenue, right? I think the free market should dictate what full autos should cost. Because if they start selling like hotcakes, they're going to jack the prices up to keep people from buying them anyways. And I'm fine with that. Let them be super expensive. I really don't want a full auto. They are fun to shoot. Yeah, they are a ton of fun. But it's a rich man sport. Because when you start dumping, 1,000 rounds at the range, it goes quick. But let us decide. If I want to spend that money, that's fine. Honestly, keep the stupid tax. That's fine. I'd be willing to pay $200 for a suppressor if I could buy it over the counter and take it home. That's fine. Keep the tax. The NFA is garbage. And they know it. But it's one of their only things they have left to say, look, they're dangerous. Look, the gangsters, the mobsters use these deadly weapons. And they're dangerous. In the final rule, it said the AR pistols are dangerous and deadly, and they're used in crime. A rising crime rate are used with AR pistols. But why could they only cite 2 cases? If it was such a prolific problem across the United States, why are there only 2 cases? If rifles are so deadly and dangerous, then why are they only used 2% of the time in murders? Rifles of all rifles, not ARs. All rifles. Do we have a murder problem in the United States? Yeah, we do. Do we have a gun violence issue? That's debatable. I think it's more just a violence issue. Well, the United States has more gun crime than any other countries. Do you know what? There's probably way more pool drownings in California than there is in Idaho. I'm not discounting tragedy. Anytime you hear about shootings and whatever, that's terrible. That's awful. But it has nothing to do with the tool that's being used and everything to do with the bad guy using it. If we use the same logic in any other category of death, then why isn't alcohol a major issue? Why aren't drugs a major issue? Why isn't pedophilia a major issue? Those take way more than anything else. Gun crime, yeah, it's a problem because you got problems in inner cities. That's where a majority of these murders are happening. You know, they say, well, there's been more mass shootings in the United States than there are days of the year so far. Because they're adding in anything with more than 4 people involved is considered a mass shooting. In fact, that might even change. That might even be different now. I better look that up. The last time it was 4 or more people. So they could just say, man, this guy was walking down the street, inner city, there was 30 people outside, mass shooting. A cop, 3 cops, and a bad guy, mass shooting. They're jacking the numbers up to make it look way worse than it is. CDC removed all their intel on defensive gun use because it was bad for their argument. Guns are used millions of times a year to save lives. Millions. But they don't like that statistic, so they just bury it. They take it off the CDC website and hide it so you can't find out the truth. Why would the government want you to not know that? Think about it. Think about it. They're padding their numbers. They're stacking the deck. Why? Why don't they want you to have a firearm? Why don't they want you to defend yourselves? Why is it illegal to carry a knife in England? They don't have a gun problem. They have a violent crime problem. Because when the bad guys couldn't get guns, then they just went to something else. When I lived in Australia, the gun problem was already over, right? The Port Arthur shooting changed a lot in Australia. Guns were basically confiscated voluntarily, right? They were confiscated. Violent crime skyrocketed. Home invasions skyrocketed. It's not a gun problem. It's a people problem. Got to figure out what the issue is, and we got to nip it in the bud. That's what it is. There's my commentary for you. Anyway, friends, hopefully you got something out of where the NFA came from and why we have it. Hopefully you can start doing your own research. Don't take my word for it. Don't trust that I read verbatim from all the information. Look it up yourself. It's nice to carry a gun. It's nice to have that ability to defend your family and yourself if you need to. But fortify what is the real weapon, which is your mind. Get some knowledge. Get some understanding. Learn where we are now, how we got here. Once we understand that, we can know how to proceed. It's important, friends. It's important. If you're new to the gun community, if this turned your head to mush and you turned it off maybe 25, 30 minutes ago, that's probably what really happened. Hopefully you're still here. Hopefully you're still listening. Hopefully you can tell I'm passionate about the Second Amendment. If you're new to the shooting community, don't be scared to ask questions. Find a good gun shop to hang out in. Talk to people. It won't take long for you to identify which ones are like the crazy ones and which ones are pretty solid. Learn from them. Go to the range. Go to shoot. Take somebody with you. If you have a friend that's kind of apprehensive about firearms, don't force them, right? Don't guilt them into going to the range with you. Just invite them every time you go. And at some point, maybe they'll be like, yeah, okay, let's go. Think about your first time shooting a gun, especially you new shooters. What brought you into the community? Why? think a huge number was because of the violence they were seeing in the streets and the cops not being able to do anything. So they realized, man, I gotta take some precautions for myself. Great, you bought your gun for the first time. What's kept you in the community? Learn to understand that passion. Share it with others. We need all the people we can get. Honestly, the community is huge. The gun community is massive. And I don't understand why we're not more vocal. I'm done with worrying about what people think about me. I'm done. I don't care what people think about me. I know who I am, and I know what I believe in. There are many things which I believe I shall never say, but I shall never say the things of which I don't believe. I don't remember who gave that quote, but there it is. I know who I am. I know what I stand for. And I can't sit idly by anymore. We need to stand up and be heard. Violence is not going to be the answer. That is never going to be the answer. Well, I mean, I guess it could get to that point. But if we learn how to defend ourselves now, mentally, and fortify ourselves now in the courts, we should never have to get to that point. I hope we never get to that point. Understand the law. Understand why we have the Constitution. Do your own research. Please, don't take anything I say as the law, okay, as the gospel. Do your own research. Do it. Develop your own opinions. Create your own argument for the Second Amendment. So when you get in those hard conversations with people that don't agree with you, you can stand your ground and you can use logic. That's all it's boiling down to. You got this. You got this. Thanks for hanging out with me on the podcast. I do enjoy doing these. I still have a goal of getting 100 new listeners every month. So if you liked what you heard tonight, please share it with a friend. Give us a rating on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. 5 stars. We'll take all the stars we can get. Comment, like, and share, right? You always hear that on the tubes. We need to grow the community, and we need to gain confidence. We need to be willing to say the hard things. Be good. Remember who you are and what you stand for. My mom used to always tell me that. And take somebody shooting for reals. That's not just a war cry or rally cry. Take somebody shooting. Take them. Encourage them to be part of the. I don't want to say movement because that sounds really lefty. Just be part of the community. We are all stewards of the Second Amendment. And as a good steward, we fight for it. Be a good steward of the Second Amendment. Peace out. Behave yourselves. See you guys. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of the Range Minded Podcast. We enjoy having you guys here. Plus, if you want to reach out to us on our social medias, we got @RangeMinded on Instagram or Facebook or even Twitter now. And we just started a YouTube channel. Well, we started a while ago, but we're actually trying to use it, so you can find us on YouTube as well. If you want to email the show, you can email us at rangeminded@gmail.com. We check that all the time. Anyways, give us a good rating, give us a review, whatever it takes. We'll take whatever level you want to give us, and we'll see you next time on the Range Minded Podcast.